I'm Rendan, this is A Quiet Place Part 2. Let's get this over with. A Quiet Place Part 2 is coming to us 3 years removed from the original A Quiet Place, which did incredibly well. Made a lot of money, a lot of people really enjoy it, a lot of people latched on to not just the horror, the PG-13 horror in it, but the family dynamic, its moral compass, its message. A lot of people really enjoy that movie for what it's trying to do. I, for one, didn't. I can appreciate what it was trying to do, but from a horror movie standpoint, it didn't work for me. And neither does this. In fact, I think I like this less than the original one, because at least in the original one, it was a fresh idea. It was a unique concept that had some very interesting ideas, and it played around with horror pretty well for what it was. This one is incredibly dull, and it is incredibly transparent. Most of what this movie is trying to do is telegraphed way before it does it, and that's the biggest problem with it. A horror movie should be scary, and I think some people will be scared by this because not a lot of people like watching horror movies. That's just the truth. I love horror movies personally, but people don't go out of their ways to see horror movies. This, and maybe a couple others throughout the year, or even less, is all that people will watch of horror movies. This is what they expect. They expect a movie with an insane amount of jump scares, false scares, and music ratcheting up and then going quiet for the jump scare. That's what people expect, and this is what it is, which for me doesn't work at all. And it doesn't work at all here. That's the biggest drawback to this movie is, does the horror work? For me, it doesn't, because it telegraphs it from a mile away. Every time something scary is supposed to happen, it will telegraph it by having the music swell, go quiet, and then they look around, and then, oh no, there's a jump scare, or oh no, there's some crows that flew in front of the camera.
We got units headed out there now. EMS and fire.
Whereabouts?
I think up by Walker's Farm.
There's a part in this movie that telegraphed almost everything it was doing from the get-go. This girl who is deaf is going onto this train to do something. It's not clear. She's going onto the train, and then a crow flies by. Oh my god. Oh, okay, it's fine. Okay, I'm gonna reach for this first aid kit. And I got the first aid kit. It didn't fall, nothing really happened, but oh, a skeleton fell in front of her and she screamed. And then she fell down and her head was blocking the exit of the train or the door on the train. And I went, okay, she's either gonna move her head and there's a thing gonna be there, or the camera's gonna dolly over and there's a thing gonna be there. And oh, yep, there it was. And then she misses a shot to kill it and gives up hope to shoot it again. So she just like clutches her rifle, and I went, okay, here's Cillian Murphy. And boom, there he is, he kills the thing. It's incredibly see-through. It's incredibly transparent in what it's doing, which means all tension in a scene is deflated almost on impact. It's incredibly dull. And the problem is, the story here isn't interesting either. You can have a movie that's not particularly scary if you have a story that works, and that seemed to be what people latched onto the first one. They really liked the family dynamic. This one doesn't even have that, unfortunately. The main story is about Emily Blunt. She's with 2 of her kids, and she meets Cillian Murphy, and he goes off to try and track down Emily Blunt's other kid, the deaf girl, who decided to recklessly go off on her own to find a radio tower to put her cochlear implant or hearing aid or whatever it is onto a microphone in a radio tower so that the radio can transmit the signal of that across the world so that the monsters can be killed. That's the story. So unfortunately, the best part of the original one isn't there anymore. And since it's an A-B story now, we have more issues. And that's the thing. Whenever you're doing an A and B story, it's incredibly difficult to make both of them interesting. And neither really are here.
I don't know why you came all the way up here. There's nothing left.
I mean, the main story, the A story, is Cillian Murphy and the deaf girl trying to find this radio station to transmit her implant feedback across the world. That is the story. That's it. which is very simple. So, with a simple premise, you need to have some characters that are interesting, and there aren't. Cillian Murphy is a man who is sad that his wife died, and that is it. He has no character whatsoever. I think he's good in the movie. He does try, but he has no character whatsoever. There's no arc for him. He at one point says, "I didn't believe you could do this, but then you did it." And that's his arc. That he couldn't believe a girl did it, but she did it anyway. And at no point in the whole movie up until then did it seem like he disbelieved in her. He was constantly doing things, going out of his way to save her or help her. So you'd think that he would believe in her in order to do that. So the A story isn't that interesting. There's not much there. The characters aren't interesting. It's incredibly simple. And there's nothing that evolves in it. It's just like an A to B thing. They go from here to here, and they run into minor inconveniences, and then they just get there. There's really nothing to it. It's, in fact, it feels like a series of just ideas they had for scenes in between other scenes. They go into a train car and a thing attacks them, and then they go into a dock and people attack them, and then a thing attacks them, and then they take a boat to an island, and then it's all fine, and then a thing attacks them, and then they go to a radio station, and then a thing attacks them. It's like this endless barrage of scenes that have no purpose or meaning other than a thing attacks them. So A story is not great. B story is even worse. The B story is Emily Blunt and her child and then a baby. And that is it. They are staking out in a warehouse, and they sit around. And then at one point, Emily Blunt says, "We need to go get pharmaceuticals to fix my kid's ankle because it got trapped in a bear trap early in the movie." So she leaves. The best part of the original movie is barely in this movie. She leaves to go get medicine for her child and to get oxygen tanks for her baby. And then, in the meantime, her child, for no reason that I can even think about, goes out of their hidey hole and just, like, wanders around. He just, like, dicks around in this warehouse. Why? I don't know. And then he falls over, which alerts a monster to him. So he runs back into his hidey hole and takes the baby and locks themselves in, like, a furnace thing, and then he's an idiot and forgets to put the towel on the latch so that which means they're latched in there and they're losing oxygen, which means Emily Blunt has to get there to save them from the monster that's just outside and from themselves from being dumb. Or I guess less being dumb and more being scared and not remembering to do something. So that's the B story. That's our whole plot, is a series of scenes that are minor inconveniences for our main character to get from point A to point B, and then people sitting around waiting for things to happen to them. The plot is incredibly simplistic and doesn't really work in either the A or B story. The characters are incredibly simplistic and don't work, and the horror is also incredibly simplistic and doesn't work if you've watched any horror movies. So what even works about this? To be honest, not much. Even the music I disliked in this. It feels incredibly manipulative. It always comes in during an action scene going incredibly annoying. It's trying to force on the audience that there's a sense of tension that isn't there. And then whenever there's a jump scare, it goes and then fades out. And then there's a jump scare. Oh no! It's very annoying. It's very annoying. The sound design is okay for the most part. I mean, that's like the forefront of the movie. It's a quiet movie, a quiet place. So you need to have emphasized sound, and for the most part it isn't. But when it needed to be, it was, so that works. And the look of the movie's okay. I think John Krasinski tried a little bit more as a director in this. He put some more flair into it. The style of it is still pretty flat. It's mostly shot like this. A lot of eye-level wide shots. And other than that, it's like maybe a crane shot. And the only time that there's really style is at the opening scene of the movie, which is probably the best part of the movie, when you first get to see these aliens attacking this small town. There's a couple of long one-takes that are horribly stitched together with some not great editing, but at least there's style there, and that scene works pretty well. John Krasinski tries. I think the performances are pretty good as well, generally. Cillian Murphy's the best part of the movie. He actually emotes. He is really good in it, even though he has no character to speak of. So that's it. That's Quiet Place Part 2. There's nothing more to say about it. That's really it. It's nearly 2 hours of people being minorly inconvenienced. It's incredibly dull. The one thing I will say that I was happy with is that Cillian Murphy never has the turn where he's a secret bad guy. I was really expecting that to happen, that cliche, where he's like, I foiled you! You thought I was a good guy, but I'm not! That subverted my expectations and actually took me off guard, because Lord knows nothing else does. Every scare is right in your face, telling you it's about to happen, and every character has nothing to do. So, I give it a 3. I really didn't like it. I mean, if you like the first one, there's more where that came from, in terms of scares, I guess. And Emily Blunt is still good, and Cillian Murphy's still good. So if you like the first one, you might like this.